yin and yang is, well, one of my favorite symbols. And it also represented kind of the questions that I had about technology a few years ago. I got really confused because at the first part of my life, I was really a total tech fanatic. And I was like, internet is going to solve everything. I was totally in this white area of a yin and yang. And then I went to the other side. I was like, oh my God, what are we doing? Why are we building this internet? Everything is wrong. Then I went all the way to the black side. And then I thought, wait a minute, there's this gray area. Like we could use it for good, but we could, some other people use it for bad. So how do you make a distinction? And then I started kind of researching ethics and then started giving talks about it, because that's what I do. I just teach when I try to learn something. So I am by education an engineer, by practice and hacker, and I work as a community builder at the RIPE NCC. And together with Kate, thank you so much for inviting me, we came up with this subject title, Caring for the Planet While Creating Feminist Internet. It's a mouthful. It's very ambitious too. So I want to invite you to imagine a feminist internet. It's something that we still have to create because it doesn't exist, but the concept does exist. So the feminist internet principles and values are described on this website. It's a group of women who have been working on this for several years already, and they describe these values like consent and movement building and resistance. So this is their approach to define how could a better internet look like. And then there is this wonderful article by Ursula Le Guin, which tries to imagine a feminist society, which is kind of a prerequisite for the feminist internet. We can't have the internet which is different than the society that we have. And moving further is like, imagine the internet of trees instead of internet of things, because while we are building the internet, we are basically destroying the planet. And this is one of those paradoxes that has been tricky for me. So well, I'll talk a lot about it throughout the talk. So this is the internet of trees. And finally, the squirrels are also against the internet. They are one of the main cause of outages, at least in the States, and at some of the hacker campings too. So they actually just eat the cables, and well, good luck to them. So I'll talk a little bit about technical topics. I hope that I won't get too technical. And I used to do this talk called Internet Plumbing. And why the plumbing? Well, some people say, well, the internet is a collection of tubes, but it is actually also a collection of undersea cables. This is the map of the undersea cables. And it's also kind of becoming invisible, like the other infrastructures. Like it's becoming much less glamorous than before. So it's just the tubes, and the people who work on the internet are basically plumbers who are fixing your connection. But there are many layers. So this is, for me, the beauty of the internet, because it is actually working technically as the interconnection of different networks that are ignoring all the other layers. So they just interconnect on their own layer, and they're agnostic of all the other things that are happening on many other layers. And that's why we could actually kind of come up with all these innovations and so on, because the underlying layer just stayed the same. And I like the little illustration with the little Russian dolls, because these packets are actually encapsulated like the Russian dolls in each other. And in addition to all these technical layers, then there are also like other layers, financial, political, and so on. So I work for the organization called RIPE NCC, which stands for Réseau IP European Network Coordination Center. So it's like European IP networks, and then we coordinate their work. This is the not-for-profit organization. It's located in Amsterdam, and all the ISPs in Europe, Middle East, and the former Soviet republics are members of this organization, and they get IP numbers from us. So it's done in a hierarchical way. So there is like one central organization, then there is 5 regional organizations, like for the kind of continental regions. You can see them here on the map. And then all the others in every region are kind of local, and they distribute these IP numbers to their members. So the idea a long time ago, so this was in the early 90s, was very communal, very communistic, if you want, because this was the commons. So the IP addresses don't really belong to anyone, and we had to find a way to distribute them in a fair way. So this was seen to be a fair way to distribute them, and it's not based on national borders. So the internet is still kind of not really sticking to the national borders, but that's changing. So the organization that I work for is very small, and we have 25,000 members. And then we also have even larger community, and it's called RIPE community. And these people are volunteers. They come together to discuss the policies for distributing these addresses in a fair way, and a lot of other technical topics. You can see them on this slide. So that's completely open to everybody. And at the end of my presentation, there are links. How can you take part in this? Now, one of the projects that we do is called RIPE Atlas. We measure the internet. So we distribute little hardware devices to the users around the world, and they host them in these dots that you can see on this map. And so there's about 10,000 of them, and they do active measurements towards targets on the internet. So again, it's a community project. And what can you see there is that, for example, when there were some protests in Turkey, and the Turkish government redirected the traffic to the Google's resolver, which is some kind of server that tells you where your traffic should go. So like if you type in whatever wikipedia.org, then you have to translate that to the IP address. And normally you would ask that from your ISP, but a lot of companies now just ask Google. And then the Turkish government just said, oh yeah, Google is not there anymore, it's here. So all of a sudden you can see that the speed, like latency to get to that address just dropped. Like it wasn't that far away anymore, it was just here. And so you could actually, we measured that. And so this is one of the applications of this internet measurement network. But that brings out very interesting ethical questions, like, are we putting these people in danger who are hosting those probes? Because they could be in Turkey, and then their government can basically find them and say, hey, why are you doing this? Or even in a country that has even worse laws or lawlessness. So we had to kind of come up with a lot of ethically sourced decisions in order not to hurt the users or their cats. So this is how the probe looks like, the little hardware thing, and the cat of one of the users. I had to share the cat photo. So we did also a lot of review of like ethics of our measurements, and we also compared our way of doing things with the human rights considerations. So a lot of these things are clickable, and you can go to research it further. And so the human rights considerations for internet protocols have been developed and described in this so-called RFC, request for comments, from IETF. And then IETF stands for Internet Engineering Task Force, which is one of these kind of alphabet soup organizations that are taking part in the internet governance. This picture was created by Ingrid Burrington, and she calls it a serial killer graph of the internet governance, because she was trying to kind of connect all these actors and what are they doing. There is a lot of organizations. And so recently, like a few months ago, IETF and the Internet Architecture Board published another RFC called The Internet is for End Users, which is really interesting change of approach. Like they're super techy, and they are mostly just developing these protocols for the other techies. And then they started mostly after Snowden revelations in 2013, they started introducing more like political awareness into their work. And now they kind of said the internet is for end users. And the next link on this page is about the article that I wrote, which is kind of a review of this RFC, which is the internet is for empowerment of end users. Like, what does it just mean for end users? So how can we empower the end users so that they are actually using the internet for the greatest good? And how do we know that? Like, how can these engineers actually know what's for the good of the end users? The other way of looking at that is to create the digital commons or the data commons. And that there is this UK Institute for Public Policy Research. They came up with a paper a few months ago. And that is also similar to governing the internet infrastructure. So the IP addresses, the routers, the name servers, and so on. So this is some of the recent work. If you're interested, you can read more about that. And a lot of my work this year has been guided by the content of this book called Data Feminism, because I used to talk like already for 2 or 3 years about ethics, and then they said, wait, that's not really empowering enough. We should talk about the data justice, and not just like deal with the bias, but actually acknowledge that the bias produces oppression and so on. So how to deal with all these concepts to challenge the powers that are being encoded into the internet infrastructure because of the oppressions and inequalities that exist in the world, and not just the biases and not just the unfairnesses. So it's tricky to introduce all this to the RIPE community, but with your help, maybe it's going to go further. So I recommend this book. It's amazing, and you can find it completely online. And they did the communal review. It's just great. So that brings me to the climate. So we were very much busy with like diversity and inclusion in the technical community, and then also started talking about, but wait a minute, we are flying around like crazy to govern the internet, but what is that doing to the climate? Or what are all these cables doing to the climate? And so even the Association for Computing Machinery and the programmers started thinking about it. So they came up with some recommendations in 2017 of how to organize more of their conferences to be online and not just flying around. And then this year, everybody just had to do it that way. So that's good. Already at the beginning of this year, there were many conferences and that means like a lot of communities, we're talking about sustainability. So the CCC Congress had resource exhaustion and like a whole sustainability track. Then the EuroDig, which is European Internet governance, then the scientific conference about computing within limits, and the Republica that happens in Berlin also wanted to have a sustainability as a topic, but then, and my talk was accepted, but then they had to cancel. So this is becoming a bigger topic also in the technical communities. Last week, there was the Internet Governance Forum, and we also talked about sustainable Internet governance, and we came up with an addition to their 10-year-old how do they even call it, charter, not only to use the Internet to protect the environment, but also to protect the environment from the growth of the Internet. Well, it sounds good, but we still have to figure out how to do it. And then also to answer one of the questions that Kate had for me while we were preparing this, what are the alternatives? Well, there are alternative networks. So the traditional internet is not so cool anymore, but there are still cool networks. And the people who make them, they of course share their knowledge. And so you can download both of these books. They even went to IETF and actually documented their work in an RFC. And they have a research community called Gaia, appropriately, to talk about the different way of doing the networking. So what does this have to do with hackers and with feminists? Well, I'm part of both the hackers community and this technical community for internet governance. And then we've been doing hackathons for the last few years. There is a large overlap between these communities. I've been also distributing these RIPE Atlas probes in the hackerspaces, and they were also running on hacker camps. And the other similarity between these two, because they are kind of the same, is that it's just guys. So this is completely amazing for me to be now talking to like the whole group of just women. It's so wonderful. And so basically, in this ethics of the network systems research, they also came up with the kind of realization that the internet started as a technical network, but now is actually giving a lot of impact on how is the society developing. And still the internet itself is created by the techies, highly educated from the Western and Northern world, white, male, and then they create the internet the way they are. So when we try to bring more women to all these technical groups, they go like, oh yeah, but, and then there's this like bingo card, like, why can't we have more women? Oh, but they're not interested. Oh, they don't really come out of the university. They didn't answer to our call for presentations, blah, blah, blah. And then when we kind of push for it, they go like, oh no, but then that means we have to step down. Yes, you do. And then they feel oppressed. So that's, it's a challenge. And so the women actually started creating their own hackerspaces. And Alison Parrish also questioned this whole concept of hackers ethics. Like, it's all open, it's all based on meritocracy, it's all like whatever. It's not true. So she made a wonderful, wonderful talk and a great article that you can read later. And then other women are creating this. This is a beautiful animation where you can actually choose the parameters and create a different look of a hacker. Chiara was talking about the role models. Well, we try to bring more role models into the technical communities and to celebrate women that actually helped create the computing as we know it now. And so we had the Hacking Feminism series of workshops in one of the Amsterdam hack labs called LAG. So there is a lot of material there, and it's all available for you to use if you want for your workshops. And now, this was all very like celebrate the technology, but you have already talked about how the capitalist society is creating the capitalist internet. So yes, there you go, very nice illustration. And this is another illustration of a digital divide. So for us, we have the blue, clean data centers, cables, everything is fine. And then for the global south, we have the kids digging in the mines for the precious metals or rare metals, or dismantling the e-waste that is exported from us. And so there is a lot of pollution, a huge energy consumption, very bad labor conditions for the people who create our equipment. And then people still say like, oh, don't talk about politics. This is all just technology, but actually the technical is political. And so it's very difficult to bring this awareness to the technical community. So I have to keep on saying like technical is political, language is political, crypto is political. And that of course brings me back to feminism, because this is all the intersectionality of all kinds of oppressions and inequalities. So the techies, the nerds, the people who govern the internet from the technical side have the great responsibility. This is a quote from the scientist who was working on the creation of the nuclear bomb. And he said, well, we do have a great responsibility to the humanity, to the planet, and to the squirrels. Squirrel is my totem animal. And they are winning the cyber war. And there are other animals that are also attacking the power stations, like jellyfish. This is my other favorite animal. And more. I just found all these pictures and I find them amazing, so I just wanted to share them. So instead of creating a hierarchy of the anthropocentrism, like we are the best, we are the smartest, and we have the best internet, we should find a different place for ourselves in the ecosystem of nature. Otherwise, we will just destroy our own planet and our own internet. So the young generations are actually aware of that. And so the Extinction Rebellion is a great movement to join. And maybe we'll do everything for nothing, because maybe the world will not end, but we have created a better internet and remote jobs and the clean air and so on. So yeah, let's work on creating the better world. And so as a first step to caring for the planet, I'm caring for the plants. So this is my my plants, and this is the end of my talk. The next slides are just for if you download the slides.
That was so Congress-like. You were just like perfectly on time. But that's really good, because we're actually having a small chat here with Sino, and she was asking how to become a hacker, if there is like courses where one can become a hacker. And I said, well, a hacker is such a big definition.
Yeah.
You know, which do you want to do? Hardware? Do you want to do coding? Do you want to? And so she wants to target powerful people. So like the most traditional kind of stereotypical idea of what a hacker does. So do you have any advice?
Well, I have anecdotes. So there was this Dutch guy who hacked Trump's Twitter account. You can't get more powerful than that.
Sure.
Because he just guessed his password. I mean, that's like social engineering, basically.
I don't believe it. You think he didn't have an insight in Twitter?
No.
It was a very easy password. Yeah. I don't remember. I heard this story.
And then there was another Dutch guy who actually kind of went to the meeting of, I don't know, European Council or NATO or something, security committee, he just Zoom bombed them because some other politician actually tweeted like, oh, I'm invited. And then there was like a piece of the password, like whatever, 4 letters, and there were still 2 more to guess. So this guy just like went and guessed. So this is kind of a way to do it. So it's basically social engineering. But the good starting point is to kind of hang out with other hackers.
Yeah. So I was saying that there's a really big Italian hacking community, that, I mean, I'm not sure around the Venice area, but that's why I shared the link to the remote congress this year. Every year, the Italians, they have their own embassy where they cook food for everybody. And
around Venice, there is, or around Trieste, there is a festival every September, like a hackers festival outside. And then, the Italian hackers are super active and also politically active, because I really have problem with the traditional hackers community, because they are just like, oh, blinking lights and just soldering or whatever, no political awareness. So if you have to choose, don't go to a hackerspace, go to a hack lab, because there is a difference.
Yeah, a lot of them are very anarchist and pro Rojava and a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
Can I say something as well? I'm not a hacker, but I'm nerdy enough to understand basic stuff. And what I would suggest is, as also Juliana said, there is this one here, Italian Hacker Embassy. You can find a lot of people around the web who are actually politically active, and if you want to look for someone who is who has the same objective as yours, the main thing is to go and see which political group, which social center, which activist group is doing what. Because as also Vesna said, most of the hackers, I personally know someone, so I can say this is actually true. Most of them are not actually interested in politics. So even if you try to, make a contact with them, they will just say, yes, this is not what I'm looking for. This is not the kind of relationship I want. So first of all, be informed about what kind of movements there are in your area. And I'm pretty sure you will find someone very interesting. And thank you, Vesna, for all this information. It's very precious.
Thank you too for your interest, and for the interesting questions, and for previous presentations. They were amazing. And Juliana, I also wanted to say, we used to have in the real world, when we had conferences, we used to have the academic support program. So then we would invite students to submit their work, students, researchers, professors, and then we would sponsor them to come and present at our conferences. So I will like to invite you, because that would be amazing to hear some of the other social scientist research about the internet at our very technical conferences.
Nice.
Yeah. I can say something.
Yeah.
Okay. About focus in Italy, we have one of the most important hacker community in Europe. But I belong to hacker community for very few years, about 2 or 3 years, I think. The characteristic of hacker community in Italy is that we have activism, hacker practice linked to politic practice. So because activism in Italy is linked, hacker community is very linked in its history linked to social center. Hack Lab in Italy are in the social center and belongs to underground and cyberpunk maybe culture, countercultural culture linked to autonomist and anarchist group. So this is a peculiarity of Italian hacker community, and is very produce a lot of activities. Every year we meet in hack meeting that is organized by 1998. The first was in Florence, and every year hacker community there is divided into different groups. Now the interesting things that we have a group in which participate a lot of women, and every year women hacker, feminist hacker community organize an event, eclectic hacker, and the past years was in organized in the XM 24. There is a great social center in Bologna that was sgomberato, was closed by the police 2 years ago. But the hacker community is very active and organize a lot of workshop, a lot of meeting, a lot of activities. And if you wanted to know about that, it's very interesting history. You can look at the hack meeting sites and blogs. So if you want, you can subscribe the site, and a lot of activists in hacker communities are linked to media activists and to indie media. So in Italy is what very a great linkage about between hacker communities and media activists. It's a very singular history. The same you can find in Spain. A lot of networks of hacker community networks are linked to Spain and to the group of in Barcelona, a group of activists linked to Torres Medina that organize a group of researchers interested in technologies and using of the technologies by social movement and media activists. It's very interesting. I participated in a workshop any years ago when I went to France to participate in the Nuit Debout movement. So I suggested to visit the site. And after, if we organize other meetings in social science and in the academic, I moved in both inside and outside academic side, because in Italy the group of researchers linked to social movement studies is come from movement too. So we have both the dress of social researcher, social science researcher, and activist. So it's another peculiarity of Italian group linked to the Scuola Normale Superiore. So I have two questions, one for Vesna and one for Chiara. Is it possible to discuss?
Yes, I think we have a bit of time. Yeah, go on.
Okay, but Chiara, I see your presentation and looking very interesting. I ask you to, in my presentation, I present the point of view from below, from the movement, from the activists. So you present the point of view from a top-down point of view. That is very interesting, I think. And I wanted to ask you if there is the idea of such politics to fight against gender inequality. From the institution that you present in your presentation, what kind of project they prepare, or if they organize something to fight against gender inequality, what kind of politics, and in which the grassroots society can be participated in this process. And the other question for Vesna, it's a more a reflection. When I do my research, I interviewed an hacker, a very famous hacker linked to the Ippolita Collective, and I ask you, what do you for you, what is hacker? And she told me, hacker is an attitude. Is a way to see things, is wherever it's something that you are not to, but you are looking for the knowledge, for the curiosity of knowledge about hacker community. I want to ask you what do you think about that? Finish. I stop. Thanks for your presentation. Very, very interesting. I leave another meeting for all of you. This one.
Yara, you want to go first?
Yes, I'll go first. So, of course, I do see where you're coming from. I see your point, and of course, I don't represent the corporation. I don't talk for Google or Facebook, but I do talk for the cultural sector. That's probably what you are. So, the cultural sector, we use those forms of communication to reach out. It's inevitable. It's what we do. Our galleries, museums, theatres, every cultural, even like university, they use those channels to reach out and communicate. And so you need to be very aware that while you're using those channels have limitation, and although you can't drastically or dramatically change them, you can influence the way you're using them. You can influence a systematic change through the users. And just an example to be more specific, looking at the Manchester Museum and what's been doing in the last couple of years, we promote a systematic so we put at the core of our values, like representation of all kind of voices, amplification of all kind of voices, which translates into practical events, research, exhibition, community work. Just to give you some example, we are going to appoint very soon the first, there's no other thing in the world, the first indigenous perspective curator. The museum has a collection of artifacts coming from all over the world. United Kingdom, Great Britain the Great British Empire was covering almost all over the world. And of course, by what has been brought back, it's from those ex-colony. And so there's a much complexity of narrative, behind that. And if that place, it's those narratives are written by the same usual suspect, white, middle, what Vesna was highlighting before, male, middle class men, we can't make the change. So we're going to appoint an indigenous perspective curator, which definitely have to meet target of coming from those backgrounds, having those perspectives. Second one, another example, we're looking at opening up the narration, the narrative, behind the collection itself. When we talk about this specimen and how we acquire them, either they are from archaeological background, artistic background, a natural history, they tell a story, and usually it's a story that it's a political, social, economic, and some kind of voices, women voices as well, they're not included, and the museum trying to break that barrier. And third, another example, it's the inclusion of retelling these narratives from perspective of even sexual orientation or gender, disrupting gender. And so, like in the last couple of years, we've been actively working with Superbia, which is a national organization about LGBTQ and A, and a group of great artists, drag queen, came to the museum and organized the event, and with cultural trails telling the narration and the stories behind our collection through the lens of a different view, which is their view. So when we use social media, when we use internet to break through that barrier, we need to make sure that when we apply these narratives, when we apply these narratives, they have to reflect and impact, and only like changing the language, opening up the views and expanding what really is freedom of speech, then you will guarantee that people will feel represented and they will start to engage even more. And there's a tiny slow change that will eventually get us there.
Thanks.
I hope that's the answer you wanted. And that's just a fraction of what we do.
Yes.
So just pick up some of the main things.